Hello and welcome to this online session. This will be looking at multifactorial influences on leadership. This is the second online session for this module. So we've already looked at leadership and management, and this is now concentrating on what factors we think are out there which will impact on leadership. We think on average you may take somewhere between 3 and 6 hours. It's difficult to be precise, and this will very much depend on how much literature searching you choose to do, how much thinking time you need. But we would always recommend that you never try and sit in front of a computer and complete an online module in one go. Please take the bite-sized approach. Study at your own pace. You can pause this presentation, you can stop this presentation and come back to it to a later date. It will remain on Blackboard for the entire time of your module.
There is a tip that you might want to be aware of though before you go any further. Because this is actually saved as a video link, the embedded links to other areas will not work. So you might also choose to open up the ordinary PowerPoint and have that running alongside or in the background on your desktop, so that you can actually go to links as we actually point them out through this presentation.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, multifactorial influences. Now, obviously, just the title will give this away. This is a massive kind of topic. We've got a restricted wordage, so we need to find a way of being able to reach the appropriate level, because this is master's level study. So the approach that you'll find in this online module is that we will offer you a menu of things to look at, so you can tailor your learning and focus on the particular factors which are most significant to you. So it's not to provide you with all the information that you need, but it's to get you thinking, to give you some ideas of the direction that you might take, to have an awareness of what's out there, to link you to wider reading, some videos and web pages and things that you might choose to follow.
So in effect then, this is a prompt or a starting point, and there will be some developments that will occur later on.
That's right.
To be able to get to the point where I'm in a position to be able to structure writing, if that's what I'm going to do.
This should allow you to pinpoint the particular factors you want to look at. So where all this fits in, on the first day of the module, we used the World Cafe approach when we deconstructed our learning outcomes. So we're going to use that again. So you'll be familiar with the process. And in this, we will have you in small groups. We'll get you to look at one factor which you have explored, which will be triggered by this online session. And the idea is it's going to really help you prepare for learning outcome 2.
So the World Cafe exercise should be an opportunity where I might actually bring my own idea to the table.
Yes.
But
literally.
I'll also have the opportunity to share other people's impressions of what it is I might be aiming to do.
Yes, that's right. And the idea of peer review is really, really important, and peer feedback. So where does it fit? So this is learning outcome 2, which is demonstrate a critical conceptual analysis of the multifactorial influences which impact on the role of leaders in health and social care.
Now I look at that and I can see there's quite a lot of stuff there, for want of a better way of putting it. So what sort of wordage have I got to be able to address this learning outcome?
Well, the notional wordage for this is 1,500 words, so you'll appreciate this is quite a short, concise piece of work.
Okay, and that really does mean then that I've got to be quite clever and quite careful in the way that I actually articulate my ideas and what I want to look at and the influences that impact upon it.
Yes.
So with that in mind, I've got to be mindful then that I might need to engage in quite a lot of early planning and certainly a lot of early reading.
Yes. So it would be nice at this stage if you kind of stop the recording, get a piece of paper out, just jot down at this stage your own understanding of this outcome, what you think you're required to do in this piece of work. And when you've done that, then come back to the recording. So we've used some academic words in there. We've talked about a critical conceptual analysis of the factors. So if you look at your notes now, what does that suggest to you? What level of exploration do you think will be required in this assignment?
I suppose the key words there is the criticality, isn't it?
Yes.
This has got to be more than a narrative, it's got to be more than a description.
Yes.
It might start off with a statement of a fact about the things that matter to me.
Yes.
But then I've got to look at that balance of perspectives in relation to those issues. So I've got to look at almost the big picture stuff.
Yes, the macro stuff. Yes, okay. That's absolutely right.
So that level of criticality has got to be in the writing, but then it's this sense then of that's followed through by this analysis of the concepts, or the conceptual analysis.
Yes.
Which again sort of signposts me to thinking about the fact that maybe I need to pull some things apart and perhaps do a little bit of digging.
Absolutely. We kind of, in class, we've used the word interrogate. So you'll feel like a dog with a bone, and you're giving it a really good shake and seeing what comes out of it, and asking the intelligent question, the 5 whys, so what does that mean? What does that imply? Why is that significant? So trying to get to those deeper levels of analysis. So in my mind, this is the depth of critical analysis. So it means that you've got to acknowledge the breadth and depth of issues that are out there. But for the purposes of the assignment, and the main focus of the assignment will be 1 or at absolute most 2 key factors that you will take down to some depth. And I've used the rope analogy because that gives this idea of, if you concentrate on 1 factor or 2 factors that you think are really key into that discussion, you will bring other things, because leadership is so interlinked, interwoven. So even if, for example, you decide that you want to look at culture as your particular focus, you can't pull culture out without bringing other things with it. So you'll necessarily might be bringing in change, you might be bringing in communication. So as long as it's the focus, so it's a stick of Blackpool rock and we've got culture running down the middle, but we're aware that things are going to wrap around it.
Okay, so if I sort of try and clarify that for myself, in effect what you're inviting me to do is analyse the concepts that impact upon leaders, but I'm not analysing leadership per se.
No, because that will come in the other assignment. The other assignment is getting you to do a critical and evaluative review of leadership theory. Now, there will be a little bit of something in here about acknowledging what leadership is, but it's going to be very, very small. We need to kind of hit the ground running with this assignment, and we're giving you a focus, so that allows you to get to some kind of depth.
Okay, so I suppose really the hint that you're giving me there, Trish, is the fact that if I take an intelligent look at the other learning outcomes for this module, they're almost telling me what not to do in this learning outcome.
Yes. Okay. So, for example, you wouldn't need to spend time exploring the difference between leadership and management in this one. That's something that would fit within the first larger assignment.
Okay.
So you can touch reference. It's nice to define your terms, but keep it quite light, and then move into the main body.
So at a very crude level, is this like thinking about the big picture, wider issues and the impact they might have upon me and my practice without actually interrogating my own leadership style and the way I would actually use it?
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
So we've mentioned a World Cafe, and the reason that we're using a World Cafe is it's an example of a formative assessment. A formative assessment will give you opportunities to gain feedback from myself, but also from peers in the group. And you're aware that we've got a very expert and diverse group of people who can give you some really interesting perspectives and new understandings. And the idea is that you'll learn with each other and from each other as well. So for the actual day that we run the World Cafe, which is signposted in your module handbook, please bring with you a page. Now, you may have written more, but I only need you to bring a page of your ideas, any material that you found really useful in relation to the 1 factor. So for the purposes of the World Cafe, I only need you to bring 1 factor that you've chosen to explore and explain why you've chosen this factor.
So if I'm developing my ideas, is it possible for me to get in touch with you just to sort of sound you out in respect to the factor that I might have identified?
Yes.
So that I don't waste a lot of time and energy maybe going off on the wrong track?
Yes, or finding something that's too broad, that's going to make life difficult for you in the 1,500 words that you've got available. So yes, please use the opportunity for feedback in relation to the focus that you'd like to take for this cafe and eventually for the assignment. Now, if you can't come, because I'm aware that people are busy and in practice, so there's a reason that you can't come, then please, because this is a sharing exercise, email me your page of ideas and references, and I'll bring it to the World Cafe on the day, and I'll post it on Blackboard so that we can continue the idea of learning with and from each other.
Okay, so really, again, that's quite a useful thing, isn't it? Because I'm almost creating a very broad, almost framework by coming with my page of ideas.
You are.
And having maybe had a conversation or perhaps some email chats with you about where I'm going and what I'm going to do, that then gives me that structure. And actually by sharing that with everybody else, I can see how other people are approaching the issue that they've identified, and perhaps I might be able to glean some ideas from them and equally share my ideas with others.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm asking you now to use a mind mapping approach. Now, this might be something that you're very familiar with, in which case move on. If it's something that you've not actually used in practice, it's a really good mechanism. You can use it in lots of different ways within a work setting, but also, I don't know, when you're actually in the planning process of any assignment, this is a good place to start. And for the purpose of this mind map, we want you to look at the range of factors which impact on leaders and their ability to lead. And you'll notice this is the generic leader rather than you as an individual leader. So before you start, we want you to draw a mind map to help you see the extent of these factors and interrelationships. And there's a process that we'll follow, which is about starting with you and then moving off to the generic idea of leaders. But if you want a little bit more information about mind mapping as an actual art, because it is an art, just if you minimize the recording now and go into your PowerPoint version, click on the link, it'll take you to a YouTube video which explores the concept of mind mapping, which was originally developed by Tony Buzan. And keep it in mind as something that you might use as a strategy for other things in the future. So for your first mind map, so what we need is a big piece of paper, a cup of coffee always helps. Clear your mind. And then the idea with a mind map is you actually put down on paper everything that comes into it. You're not discriminating in too much detail. And what you're trying to do is find out what's out there. And the question I want you to consider is, if you had a really good idea for a service improvement in your area of practice and you wanted to make some changes, whether this be big or small, in relation to your team, would you be able to just do it? Or would there be things that would come into your way that might prevent you from doing it? And the reason I'm asking you to do this, and we've already discussed that this isn't, eventually the piece of work isn't about you as an individual leader, it's about generic leadership. But if you start with yourself and look at what you're experiencing as a clinical leader at your level of practice, it makes it so much easier then to turn that around and step back and look at, okay, this is what I'm looking at, this, how does this translate onto the macro perspective, the bigger kind of scale?
So I can actually see this original, this initial mind map as being something that is potentially quite messy.
Yes.
In that there might be a lot of stuff on there.
Yes, hopefully linked.
Okay, yeah.
So
there may be some arrows going in one direction
yes.
or both directions. I might even choose to perhaps do things me in one colour, things affecting me in another colour, things affecting the bigger picture stuff in yet another colour.
And that's what that YouTube video actually shows you how to do that.
Right.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, this is something that probably will look quite big, and it is just the initial starting point.
It is, yes.
So, is there any value in actually keeping these original mind maps and maybe offering them as appendices to the that very short amount of words that I've got, so that you can see the process that I've engaged in?
Absolutely. And if we take you back to the learning outcome 2, it is asking for that critical conceptual analysis, and this is part of that process, because as you move and develop your mind map, you're reaching deeper levels, you are critiquing the concepts that are out there, so it's part of that critical thinking process. So yes, I mean, obviously appendices aren't marked, but you can make reference to it, and it demonstrates the journey of your thought process.
So it may be that I might start off with one that's quite messy, I might generate another one that's a little bit more focused, and ultimately I might end up with a third, which is where the real focus of what I'm going to consider sits.
Yes.
Okay. And I suppose this allows me to recognise the fact that when we're looking at issues that sort of perhaps, influence practice, the service improvement, they can actually come from not only just the top but also from the bottom, and indeed any level in the organisation.
Absolutely, yes. So this is just to reinforce this idea, and I've used the kind of idea of dropping something into water and see what happens, because a little idea will ripple out into other areas. Okay. So your idea at your micro level will help you ripple out and look at and consider what generic leaders in health and social care are facing, and that helps with the bigger picture.
Okay, I suppose this makes me think that actually there might be something that's relatively small scale in the grand scheme of things, but actually lots of small scale things have the potential to add up to something relatively big, don't they?
Yes, they do.
So that's why that initial discussion with yourself is probably quite important, because my my initial impression might be that this isn't good enough to look at here. It's not big enough. There's not
Or
enough
there might
mileage
not
in
be
it.
enough literature. That's the other thing. If you
Yeah.
have a very discrete area, you might find it difficult. And obviously, this is master's level, so we're looking at depth. We're looking at the breadth of engagement with the literature. It could be that you find yourself looking at other areas outside of your normal search, the way the journals and databases you'd normally use, and translating ideas across. And that's good, because that's innovative thinking.
And I suppose that's where you've given us a hint, because you've actually said, you know, the generic leaders in health and social care. So it's not just about being in your own discrete area, it's about maybe looking out of the box slightly, looking at what other people are doing in related areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hopefully you've got, at this stage now, an interesting start to your first mind map. Now stand back and have a look at it. You know, when we looked at the idea of Harry Potter's pensive, and when you get things out and get them at a more of a distance, you can see themes and patterns. So hopefully when you go back and look at this, it'll be like a bit of a Harry Potter pensive idea, in that you might now see things, patterns you might see as a result of the things that are impacting on you as your clinical leadership role, what the generic issues might be, what are the bigger pictures which stem from it. And these are things that you might finish up adding to your mind map. So we're going to have some layers going on here, and you might look at something quite small and think, actually, that's pointing to something big, like, I don't know, this is about public funding, this is about attitude to risk, this is something big in relation to culture, and that you might decide, actually, that's interesting, that's what I'd like to look at. Now, I've only given you a few examples there. There are lots and lots of things that you can do in this assignment. There are masses of factors which impact on leadership, but just to give you an indication of where, when you've looked at things on a micro level for you, how it might point to the factor that you might want to choose.
Okay. Is there a possibility that I could come at this from the opposite direction?
Yes.
So maybe if I've got something in my head, because it's sort of like a bit of a hot potato that is almost like big picture, for example, something to do with perhaps public funding, or something to do with, you know, the perception of the media.
Yes.
If I see that as being significant, I can then almost do this in reverse, can't I?
Yes.
So I can look at it from the other way.
Yes, that's right. So we've got another step to follow now. So we should have, if we just recap, we've got your perceptions of what's impacting on leaders at the micro level. So in your leadership role or your clinical leadership role, that allows you to stand back, look at the bigger picture, look at, I wonder what the generic thing might be here. So it could be culture, it could be power, it could be politics, it could be the rate of reform. So you're coming up with something quite big. But obviously we need to connect that to the agenda in health and social care. So your next step is to put another layer on and try and work out, okay, have I got connections here to any professional political drivers for leadership? Because obviously we're looking at, in the areas that we're working in, that there might be professional implications alongside the other implications. And can you connect some policy documents, white papers, green papers, professional reports to support your ideas? So you start to make some new links.
Okay, so actually, in retrospect now, I'm thinking about the fact that this isn't going to be something that I can do in one sitting.
No.
This is going to be something that I'm actually going to have to go away and think about in terms of me and what impacts upon me.
Yes.
And then try and make a link with the big picture stuff.
Yes.
And then I'm going to try and identify a particular area in that big picture stuff.
Yes.
And then once I've done that, I'm looking at maybe the professional, the political drivers and the policy documents,
Yes.
which actually do have a tendency to overlap, don't they? So
They
whilst
do,
we've got
yes.
these separated out as two things, they may actually be a bit of a mishmash somewhere
Yes.
in the middle.
And at this stage, you might not be sure of the factors you want to do. So you might be doing this in relation to the bigger mind map that you've got. You might not just be looking at this step now in relation to the specific area. You might not have got that far.
Okay.
So just see where you are with it. But it's obviously really important that we've got a sound policy background and context to be able to hang our ideas on.
But this almost signals to me that here's my opportunity to create a second mind map.
Yes.
Having gone through the process of looking at
Whichever's
lots
easy
of
for you.
things,
Yeah.
I'm now at a point where I'm saying, okay, this is the issue.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm now looking at what professional political policy documents might surround that issue.
Yeah.
So this might be another layer to that journey of deciding where I'm going that I add in.
Use this in whatever way is going to help your thinking. It's there to support you. So if you're still thinking big picture, then connect it, the policy drivers that you can, to the big picture you've got. If you're already thinking, actually I know what I'm going to look at, then you can make it quite specific to that particular area. Just use this as a scaffold to support you. So hopefully you're adding to your mind map, and as Jeannette has said, it could be that you've now got a series of mind maps. It's whatever is easier for you, and your choice. And it's not in our guidelines, it's not a requirement, but your choice is, do I want to append the completed mind maps to the assignment, which demonstrates the critical journey through your thinking, because you can see through this process you are developing a more critical mindset as you go through, and you're unpicking a range of issues as well. So that's that conceptual understanding.
So it might be useful, because obviously it makes perfect sense to me, because it's the journey that I've made.
Yes.
So I know where I've come from and where I'm potentially going to.
Yeah.
But you've not walked that road with me.
No.
So it might actually be useful to have some sort of just very brief overarching narrative in this appendix to explain to you how I've done, what I've done, why I've reached the point that I've reached. I'm obviously not looking for any depth of anything,
No.
but simply to make it clear to you.
Yes, that's right.
I suppose as well, by doing that, it also makes it clear to me.
Yes, that you can be writing yourself into understanding in this process.
So obviously we've talked about the fact that it's not good to just restrict yourself to your own unique areas. So whilst I might see myself as sitting in health,
yes,
I also need to be aware of factors that occur in social areas that have the potential to impact upon health.
Yes,
and bring those in if I possibly can.
And obviously the learning outcome, the bottom line is you have to meet the learning outcome. It does actually specify health and social care.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem if you tip more one way than the other, but please don't ignore one side. So if you're from health, don't ignore social care. If you're from social care, don't ignore health. And in fact, your issue might be the need for closer integration of health and social care. It might be the area you actually want to look at, and the impact on leadership. There may be differences, there may be similarities, so do kind of fish a bit wider than normal. So the next section are resources, and they are suggestions only. So the focus of your reading, the focus of, hopefully you now have an understanding of where you'd like to go with this, but if you haven't, you might use the resources that follow to kind of nudge you into, okay, which factor do I want to focus on? These are there to prompt your thinking. I've just signposted you to a whole range of stuff, and as you know from discussions already, there is never a shortage of information on leadership. I don't want you to drown in information. I want you to find stuff that's relevant to you. So there's a whole range, and consider this to be a menu. You wouldn't go and order 6 starters if you're in a restaurant. So this is a menu for you to pick and choose from. Open the documents up, scan through the executive summaries, use the find search strategies to see if this is going to be relevant. If it's not, then you don't need to use it. It's just triggers to get you to familiarise yourself with what's out there, what's relevant to you. You know, skim, read it in depth, ignore it. If you think, actually, no, I know where I'm going with this, I'm going to find my own documents, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, because I suppose at this point the temptation is to sort of prove to somebody that you've engaged sort of with a huge range of literature. And while
you might be fully formed and know what you want to look at.
Yeah, I was going to say, whereas that might not be, necessarily a bad starting point. There is an art in actually identifying the specifics of what you want to look at.
Yes.
So the idea of a menu is quite nice, because actually I will select according to my appetite.
Yes. Please don't finish up like this. It does look a bit like my desk, but
but there is huge potential for this, isn't there? Because the issue with things like policy documents is that they do tend to be quite large. They tend to be quite verbose.
Yes.
Sometimes you have to really unpick what's in there to find the point that's being made.
Yes.
So I suppose I might be tempted personally to go more for the executive summary type scan.
Yes.
To decide whether I do need to then trawl through the larger document.
And beware before you press print buttons, actually how long the document that you have in front of you might actually be. So obviously we're not going to go through these in depth, but these are just some ideas of some of the very current stuff that's out there at the moment that it might be relevant to the approach that you want to take. So the Kehoe report, Don Berwick's report into patient safety, which all really are stemming from Francis, because Francis has kind of changed the agenda. The government's response to the Francis report, which is patients first and foremost. It could be that you're interested in looking at the impact of politics and the rate and pace of change, in which case you might want to go back to the Health and Social Care Act. We've got this new body from April, NHS England. There's lots of really interesting things on there that you might look at. And then there's the operating framework, Everyone Counts, planning for patients. And then I've just put a generic website, the King's Fund, because they've got a lot of very specific information on leadership and management and a lot of really useful reports
I suppose
that you can dip into.
Yeah, I suppose what comes across from this list, just glancing at it and first impressions, is actually this is really contemporary stuff.
Yes.
This is material that's being generated, in the here and now, and potentially does have impact. And it might not be an immediate impact, but there will be maybe a slow fallout in terms of what happens.
Yes.
So it will shift and alter the way that we do things. So it's probably sensible to look at those types of documents in that sort of time frame, bearing in mind the implications for the future.
Yes, and these are hyperlinks. So again, this is where, if you want to go into these, this is where you stop this recording, go into the PowerPoint version, open up and have a look at what you want to see. But that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot there.
And again, the hint is, because some of these are fairly large documents,
Don't read them all,
so this might be a point at which you stop and think about, well, what do I really want to look at? What do I see as being key?
Yes.
And then maybe going in and interrogating that particular document.
That's right, and that's a demonstration of critical thinking, the ability to discriminate and to be able to go, actually that's relevant, that isn't. That kind of process is really useful.
Okay.
So hopefully some of those will be interesting. If not, I've given you a link there to the King's Fund annotated reading lists. They have one on leadership in the NHS and they have one on clinical leadership. The annotated lists give you direct links to websites and articles. So you might want to dip into there, see if there's something useful that will trigger ideas. And you're going to look at that date and you're asking me to look at something in 2001, but this is the Performance Innovation Unit, which was originally housed on the Treasury website, I think, which is now housed on the Foundation of Nursing Leadership website. And interestingly, it's actually looking at leadership in public sectors. So that would encompass social care, local authorities, schools, health. And even though in 2001, this is a while ago, but they trawled up and tried to consider what were the constraints on leaders in a public sector environment. So bear in mind that it's dated. There may be some things in there that you might find useful as triggers, and you may be able to update some of the information that you find in there as well.
Okay, and I suppose that really makes me step back and think about the process of true integrated care provision.
Yes.
And as you say, despite the fact that arguably it might be considered a little bit dated, it's almost set the foundations for where we're moving in terms of integrated care. And whilst we've not quite got there yet, it's almost the platform from which lots of other things have been launched.
Yeah.
The other thing about the King's Fund, it's almost like a one-stop shop, isn't it? You can go in there and you can get lots of material to lots of other areas. So it's quite, having looked at it before, it's one of those places where you can find yourself getting lost and being taken along sort of like channels.
That's right. And obviously, when you write this up in your assignment, we'd want to balance where information is coming from. So you might be using some textbooks, you might be using some peer-reviewed online journals, websites, think tanks such as the King's Fund. So you've got a depth and breadth of engagement with a range of literature. That would be a very useful way to go.
Okay.
Now this is just a case study. This gives you an example of when we asked you at the beginning to look at what's impacting on me and my role as a clinical leader as your trigger to your first mind map. This is taken from, again, it's a King's Fund project, 2012, and it was looking at junior doctors, and it was looking at the experiences of junior doctors on leadership programs, and it was specifically looking at barriers to leadership and quality improvement. So I thought this might be quite relevant. It's obviously looking at one particular discipline, but it's a case study in what things might come up on that micro level, which would then help you step back and look at, okay, what does it mean on the macro level?
Okay, so it's actually quite nice to see what might have been done before in order to have a perception of how the process might be managed.
Yes. So it's broken down. I've just kind of paraphrased the report and looked at specifically enablers and barriers. Now, if you're coming at this from an allied healthcare perspective, from a nursing perspective, things like the rotation won't have an impact on you as a leader as it would in a medical context.
Yeah.
Because the rotation is absolutely fundamental and does make it very difficult to embed changes. So that would, if from a medical perspective, that would be something that would be a major barrier. So if a medic was looking at this as their assignment, there are things that they may look at that you may not. Or you might look at this list and think, actually, there's resonances.
Yeah. And there are some areas of practice whereby this is becoming an increasing feature. We don't expect people to stay in one area anymore.
No.
So you're right in that, again, looking at what other people have done and how they've managed it and recognised it can inform your own development, can't it?
Yeah, so there just might be some triggers. But it's interesting that, as we've talked about during the module, context does make a difference.
Yeah. So that really takes me back to the idea of, at some point in this 1,500 words, I'm going to have to do the contextual setting of the big picture.
Yes.
But it might be a relatively brief contextual setting.
That's right.
Or should I say succinct?
And luckily, you now have the policies at your fingertips because you've already kind of done that work.
Yeah.
So it's all ready to go.
Okay.
So again, more, I don't know if we pick out things like lack of support. So that's from perspectives of medical leaders. Now you might say, well, in my context, that's actually different. That might not be a barrier for me. If you're considering leadership to be hierarchical and not distributed, then you might feel like that you've got to be in a particular point and status within your organisation to make change happen. Interestingly enough, the final thing, not enough time for leadership, is something that cuts across, because that comes up in the Francis report and in the Patients First and Foremost, which is the government's response. So there is a strand about time to care, time to lead. So that might be an area which actually cuts across all disciplines. Okay. It might be the focus of your assignment, it might not.
Great.
So the thing to do now is some thinking time. You've had a little look at this, you might have gone into the report yourself. How does this compare with your experiences? Are there any resonance? And what does it infer? Because there might be something here around context that you want to pull out. Or it might just be an interesting thing that you think, okay, yeah, that's fine. But it's not something I need to explore in any depth at this point.
So you seem to be inviting me to go through a process whereby I think about my 1,500 words almost in sort of like layers. So there's a bit of the layer which is about me.
Yes.
And
that's quite small. It's the trigger, but there are different ways in which you can look at this assignment. You might choose to start off the assignment with, this is what I'm seeing in my nearby clinical leadership role, and then step back and look at the macro perspective.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question, or statement in perspective. So another layer might be the macro, the big picture stuff, where the policy, the politics and the professional issues might arise.
Yes.
And I get the impression that that's where you would like me to concentrate my consideration.
Yes.
Okay, and then that would be followed almost by another final layer of rounding it all up.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. So what we've got is a healthy beginning to this assignment where we've got an acknowledgement of the bigger picture, because for the purposes of this assignment, your mind map now has got lots in it. In the actual assignment, to demonstrate meeting of that learning outcome, you might choose of that mind map 4 or 5 of the big significant things that you think are really important and impacting on leadership. So you might go for culture, politics, power, pace of change, whatever you think is really important. Use the policy and the literature to support your thinking. And then it could be that you make a connection to you as a clinical leader.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter, but we don't need you to spend too long on that. It's the trigger, it's the catalyst. Okay. So it depends on where that comes into your line of thinking. And that understanding and acknowledgement of the bigger picture, supported by the literature, supported by policy, and then the rationale but for the purpose of this assignment, this is the focus I want to take. And I'm saying at the absolute maximum 2, and 1 is absolutely fine. because we already know that it's really difficult to separate leadership out.
So basically there's a bit of the micro and there's quite a lot of the macro.
Yes, absolutely. And as a final couple of areas to look at, sometimes it's nice to actually hear people speak. So you can read Robert Francis's report. This is a synopsis delivered at the King's Fund conference. I can't remember, it's something around about maybe 20-30 minutes worth. And he's taking you through assuring patient safety and quality, which is might be pertinent. But there's also, if you click on the second one, there's an abridged version. It's a much shorter one. But sometimes actually seeing the individual might be useful. So that's another layer to support the written word.
I suppose that's an opportunity whereby somebody who's actually written it is clarifying it for a public audience. So often it's better to hear things than it is to read things.
Yes. And then finally, you might want to consider leadership in social care. So I've signposted, and you click on this hyperlink, Social Care Institute for Excellence. I've linked you to leadership in local governments. Some of you might be in public health, working in local authorities, that might be relevant. And then finally, there's leadership in context, and this is from the Human Relations Journal, which might round things up for you. And you can access this from the Edge Hill Library catalogue. And it looks at national and international context, so there might be some things that come up there as well. You can read it as a hard copy, but actually there's a podcast attached to this. So again, if your preferred learning style is listening, that might be quite useful. Again, you need to click on the hyperlink, and then you'll need to put in your Edge Hill passwords to take you through it.
And again, the impression I'm getting at this point is that there's actually a lot of information out there, and part of the art is selecting what you're going to use.
Absolutely.
But you've got to look at what's out there in order to make your selection.
Yes.
So
you don't know what you don't know at the beginning.
So I suppose the hint is actually you do have to spend quite a lot of time trawling around, looking at things, making a value judgment on whether you're going to keep them or dismiss them.
And the nice thing is nothing is lost, because information that you've got in relation to current issues in health and social care at the moment impacting on leadership, there may be things that you can take through to the larger assignment as well. Obviously, we have mentioned in class, but it's worth saying again, there are 2 pieces of work, there are separate learning outcomes. The thing you cannot do is cut and paste from part 1 and put it into part 2, or from part 2 into part 1. It's perfectly acceptable to have references in that list which are in common. But it's the way you use it, the way you apply it, the way you critically paraphrase it.
Okay, because it is the context in which you're making those considerations, isn't it?
Yeah. So to summarise, I've given you a whole raft of documents. There's professional context to consider. There might be things which are international or national, or you might find things at local level. And what they're showing is the importance of leadership. And we know that we've only scratched the surface. We can only do that. It's interesting that things like the Clinical Leadership Competency Framework have recognised the importance of leadership, and that they will be embedded in the curriculum. That's already happening with medical leaders, so that will make a difference to medical leadership in the future. So the idea is that we are starting to gather momentum. If you remember the dancing guy video that we've already linked you to, that first follower, that momentum, that tipping point, and we know that Francis is going to be a key catalyst. And the context is changing, so our ideas of leadership are changing. But the thing that's really important to remember is that this is about, I think we looked at some literature, I think it was by Draft, who's talked about leadership as an ocean. And the foam at the top of the big wave is those formal leaders. But they're only the top of the wave. What's underneath, the main body, the depth of the ocean, is those people who don't see themselves as leaders, who don't have the formal thing on their door that gives them a formal role. It's those informal, nearby, distributed leaders that are really important. And what we actually need, and what Francis is saying, is we don't want people who think they're exceptional. They don't necessarily have to be senior, and they don't necessarily have to be very, very charismatic. But leaders are important because of the influence, and that they can see what needs doing and they can work with other people to do it. So that's a definition of leadership, which
might be of comfort to some of us who are maybe sat there thinking,
different levels. That's not me. Yeah, it is. And finally, what's next? So from your reading, hopefully you've got a range of factors, and Obviously, we've been kind of looking at what impacts on leaders, which may impact on their ability to do the role, but there might be positive things. If you remember the document which is in relation to junior doctors was looking at enablers and barriers.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be negative.
No, and I think that's quite important, because sometimes it can all appear doom and gloom when in actual fact you can get some positives out of it.
That's right. So you've read to inform your approach, anything that you won't need in this assignment. You've got hived away somewhere because it's going to be useful in the other assignment. You've got lots of links, lots of connections. You've got policy. You know the focus of your assignment now. You've been able to do that funneling down process, and you may have in your mind one or at the most two factors that you're going to use in your assignment. So our next step is bring just one of those factors with you. Bring it to the World Cafe. Brief rationale for your choice. Now, obviously, we're really interested in the literature, so if you can make the connections with the literature, that's great. I'm not asking for anything more than a page of A4 so that you've got something prepared to bring with you, and we'll have this sharing exercise, and hopefully at the end of it you will have that critical conceptual understanding of the issues which impact on leadership, because by listening to other people you've got that broad picture. So you bring this with you to class. I'll bring the tablecloths and the chocolates. How does that sound?
That sounds good. And what I get a sense of is that actually I might even choose to share informally, not necessarily at the World Cafe, this idea of the process I've gone through with my mind map. So
Yeah,
big,
good.
Something that's got a little bit smaller, and then something that's quite discreet, but in which I've been able to see the connecting links and factors.
That's right.
And if I can articulate why I've got to the point that I've got, that almost puts me in the position where I'm able to share that information on the basis of the policy, the politics, and the professional issues at the World Cafe.
You'll have worked your way through the whole of that assignment.
Okay.
So any further information, if you want to share mind maps, you just want to chat, there's my details. Ring me up or email me. But please keep in touch. Please use the discussion board to post your ideas and queries, and we'll see you next time you're in class. I'd just like to thank Jeannette Ellis, because I forgot to say who my partner was for this presentation.
But I suspect you've all heard me before anyway. Thank you.